is Tuesday, Yud Beis Tevis, Tovshin Ayin Gimel, and we are learning Teres Menachem Sefer HaMamarim Tovshin Yud Aleph Tovshin Yud Beis, and we are in the middle of the Mamar of Purim Tovshin Yud Aleph, and we are on page Mem Daled. Is that right? Chapter 8, Ois Ches. We're in the middle of discussing this theme of the three aspects, three dimensions that there exist in mitzvahs, and similarly three dimensions that exist in Torah. There is the Tachton, the low dimension, the low aspect. There is the Elyon, the high aspect, and then there is the one that's greater than the two. In mitzvahs, there's the physical object with which we perform the mitzvah. There is the kedusha, the godliness, the holiness, which we draw down into the mitzvah. And then there is the force that's greater than the two that combines them. This is rooted in the fact that in the source of the mitzvah there are also these three aspects. There is the idea of the mitzvahs that they were given for the purpose of refining creation, refining creatures, which represents tachton, the low aspect. Then there is the idea of mitzvahs, which is a method for man to cleave to Hashem, which is the Elyon, the higher dimension of mitzvahs. And then there is the aspect of the mitzvah that it is Rotzon Hashem, it's Hashem's will, for no purpose. In other words, what I mean to say is that it's Rotzon Hashem in its purest state, meaning to say, how does that manifest itself when one fulfills a mitzvah? It's for no motive whatsoever. It's just for the purpose of fulfilling God's will. Nothing, no benefit that will be derived for the person. That's not the intention. Similarly, in Torah, we have these three dimensions. We have Torah as it is Chochmosei. It's an intellectual pursuit, right? Jewish intellect. Then there is, so that's the Tachton of the Torah, because intellect is intellect. Obviously, this is Torah intellect. Then there is the Elyon Shebet, which is the fact that through the Torah a Yid connects to Hashem. As it says, Yisrael, there are three things that are tied together. Yisrael, Eraisa v'Kuchabrichu. Yidden, Yisrael, Eraisa, the Torah, and Kuchabrichu and Hashem. And Torah connects Yidden, a Yid, to Hashem. Then there is a higher dimension of Torah. So that, in other words, that would be the Elyon. The first one, the fact that Torah is Chochmaschem v'Naschem, your wisdom and your understanding. That is the Tachton of the Torah. Then there's the Elyon Shebet Torah, the higher dimension of Torah, which is the fact that it is a means that connects a Jew to Hashem, right? Which is more related to the Neshama. So that would be the Elyon, the higher dimension of Torah. Then there is the Torah itself, as it is one with Hashem, not as an intermediary, not as something second, something outside of Hashem, so to speak, which connects Yidden to Hashem, but rather the Torah and Hashem as one. Anon nafshik sofis Yehovis, Hashem has written himself in, has written in his very essence into the Torah. Anochi anon nafshik sofis Yehovis. These three dimensions of Torah, of course, express themselves in the way a person would learn Torah. When a person learns Torah, because it's chochmaschem v'naschem, your wisdom, your understanding, your intellect, then you're learning Torah mitzvah haguf, from the perspective of your body, intellect. It's a lower way of learning Torah. If I learn Torah to connect to Hashem, it's a higher ideal. It's a neshama ideal. I want to connect to Hashem. If one learns Torah because of the fact, with the knowledge, with the awareness that that Hashem is inserted in the Torah, then the person is completely committed to Torah. Beyond everything. Right? And then the Rebbe went on in Zion to explain that in the dinim and the laws of Torah, the laws of learning Torah, there are also three levels. There's a basic level of learning Torah for the purpose of knowing the mitzvahs that one needs to do. That's the lowest level of learning Torah. Those are things that are related to my actions, what I need to do. So that's related to the guf more, to the body. When we talk about Torah, the purpose of the chiyuv, the obligation to learn Torah, there's an obligation to learn Torah, to know Torah. So I need to know as much of the Torah as I can. That is connected to what? More to the neshama. It's not for the purpose of action, it's for the purpose of knowing Torah. Then you learn Torah for the sake of the neshama. But a person is limited, therefore his knowledge in Torah will also be limited. Then there's a higher level of learning Torah, that's v'hagisa b'yom v'layla, toiling in Torah day and night. That emanates from the higher level of Torah, which is that Torah and Hashem are one. And therefore, the obligation is to learn Torah as much as one is able to. Day and night. In other words, there are less limitations in the obligation to toil in Torah day and night than there are less limitations in the obligation to toil in Torah day and night than there are in the obligation of learning Torah to know as much Torah as one can for the purpose of knowing Torah, and certainly for the purpose of knowing what one needs to do in daily life. Now the Rebbe goes on and adds something deeper in Oisches. In all of these examples that we brought, we spoke about Tachton, the low dimension, Elyon, the high dimension, and the one that's beyond the two. What does it mean, the one that's beyond the two? The one that removes the characteristics, the opposing characteristics of each of the two dimensions, the Tachton and the Elyon, and supersedes them. Right? Now the Rebbe says that in Torah, there is something which goes even further and deeper. In other words, let me first try to say it Baal Peh, by heart. Let me try to elaborate on the point, and then we'll go inside. The idea that the Rebbe is trying to get to is that there is a point where the person who is involved in the process, whether it's in the process of doing the mitzvah or the process of learning the Torah, his particular characteristics, his particular personality, his particular ego becomes meaningless. Right? In other words, less and less of an emphasis on the person and more an emphasis on the inyan, on the matter. So when we talk about Tachton, you perform the mitzvah or you learn Torah in a Tachton way, in the lower way, then of course it's focused on the individual. Even when we talk about the Elyon, the higher way of learning, fulfilling mitzvah or learning Torah, we're still talking about the person. We're talking about the neshama, the spiritual aspect of the person, the higher aspect of the person, but still the person. When we talk about the Elyon, when we talk about the one that's greater than the two, the person loses himself completely. But is it completely? It's still not completely. Why? Because when we talk about mitzvahs, when Hashem says, I command you to put on tefillin, so by virtue of that commandment, the person becomes meaningful. Yes, he is not meaningful from the person's perspective, right? In other words, the Elyon, in the Tachton, he's meaningful, completely meaningful. He's focused on himself. In the Elyon way of learning, fulfilling the mitzvah of learning Torah, he's focused on his neshama. So it's still meaningful from the perspective of the neshama. When you say that it's just for the sake of Hashem, so the person sort of loses his identity, loses his meaningfulness. But still, if it's a commandment, if he's involved in the process of fulfilling Hashem's commandment, He's meaningful not from his perspective, but he's certainly meaningful from the perspective of Hashem. Hashem says, I want you to put on tefillin. Similarly, when we talk about learning Torah, Hashem says, I want you to learn Torah. So although I am learning Torah or fulfilling the mitzvah in the highest way possible, fueled by something which is beyond me completely, but that instruction makes me meaningful. When it comes to, so there's one exception, and that would be in Torah. In Torah, there is something which is called learning Torah lishma. Learning Torah for the sake of learning Torah. It's got nothing to do with knowing what I need, how I need to behave. It's got nothing to do with connecting to Hashem. It's got nothing to do to fulfilling Hashem's will. It's simply learning Torah for the sake of learning Torah. Lishma, for the purpose of Torah itself. Which means to learn Torah even in such circumstances where I'm not obligated to learn Torah. Where there is no commandment. In that sense, that is the ultimate level where the individual is as meaningless as humanly and as physically possible. Are you following? Are you with me?
I'm with you. Yeah.
Right? Because when it comes to mitzvah, you either have to do the mitzvah or you don't have to do the mitzvah. Right? There's no advantage in keeping on putting on tefillin again and again and again. Right? In Torah, even if I fulfill my ultimate obligation, but if I'm so committed to learning Torah Lishma, it goes beyond that. Because even in, as the Rebbe is going to say, even in the ultimate instruction of learning Torah day and night, toiling in Torah day and night, there are still limitations. Somebody that's busy with in Hilchos Talmud Torah, the Alter Rebbe enumerates it in the laws of learning Torah, that when a person is busy with finding a parnasa, for example, he could fulfill toiling in Torah day and night by learning in the morning and in the evening. And he still fulfills the highest level of learning Torah. But somebody that learns Torah Lishma, somebody that's so innately and essentially attached to Torah, it goes way beyond that. That's what the Rebbe says. So the ultimate expression of connecting to something completely beyond reckoning with my existence, with my character, with my personality, with my ego, with my identity, you could find that in Torah. Where? At the level of learning Torah Lishma. Learning Torah for the sake of learning Torah.
Is it something distinct on its own, or is it within all the other categories that we talked about? Can you, because, do you understand what I'm saying? Where you are doing within a mitzvah, and because you are still a person, but things aren't single dimensional. You have very different reasons for doing it. So while you're doing it, there is a level of this deeper connection you're having at the same time to a certain extent.
There were tzaddikim like Rashbi, where terosam umnosam. Their occupation, they learn Torah day and night. Somebody that learns Torah day and night has certain exemptions from doing other mitzvahs, from davening, and so on and so forth. Right? It's a completely different level. If you're asking whether there are elements of these that exist even in someone that doesn't have that, is not at that level permanently, yes, that's certainly possible, and we certainly have those experiences, right? But the Rebbe is getting to a certain point, he's getting somewhere. He's not just repeating the same thing again and again and again in different scenarios. The point that the Rebbe ultimately wants to get to is, when we talk about the highest level of learning, the highest level of connection to Hashem, for no motive whatsoever and without any identity whatsoever, ultimately the purpose is that this should come down in a tangible way. Not that we should become angels and malachim, that we should completely leave our identity altogether and become as nullified as possible and non-existent as possible, until up to such a point where we basically disappear. The point is ultimately to bring all this down into a civilized, normal type of life, fueled by these highest inyanim, which is the idea of Purim, the idea of Mordechai, which we're going to get to later. But let's go step by step. Ches. The Rebbe says we could say even deeper. Also the mitzvah, the instruction, to toil in Torah day and night, Kivin shah mitzvahs in tzivui laha'adam, since mitzvahs are an instruction to the person. We're not talking about Torah as it is, the wisdom of Hashem, which is beyond being related to worlds, to our realms, which later on descends, right? We're talking about what? The instruction of that Hashem says to us, toil in Torah day and night. So as we explained before, the tzivui of toiling in Torah day and night is the ultimate. It's beyond the tachten and beyond the elyon. But nevertheless, the Torah that I'm learning, yes, at this ultimate level, but it's as a result of the mitzvah of toiling in Torah day and night, and the Rebbe stresses the word mitzvah. So this is not loy ha-Torah k'meishi mitzvah atzma. This is still not learning Torah as it is from its own perspective, on its own, in its original state, at its highest level. You're still talking about Torah as it has some relationship to the person. Yes, the person. Yes, v'hagisa, day and night, limitless. But who? V'hagisa, you should. It's a mitzvah, it's an instruction, you should do it. So what are we talking about? We're talking about the ultimate level of Torah as it has a relationship, as it is related to man. But there's a higher and deeper level. The true way of learning Torah on its own, meaning to say, Torah on its own, Torah, pure Torah, Torah as it is completely beyond being related to man, who believe in the Torah lishma. That's when you learn Torah lishma, for the sake of learning Torah itself. Not for knowing what you need to do, not for connecting to Hashem, not for fulfilling not for toiling in Torah day and night. Lishma, for the sake of learning Torah. Over here, I'm learning Torah not to fulfill the mitzvah of Talmud Torah, the instruction, the obligation to learn Torah, even at the highest level of toiling in Torah day and night, but it's rather for the purpose of Torah itself. Let me add a couple of words which might clarify this. We spoke here quite extensively that Torah has a number of aspects to it. There is Torah as an instruction manual for daily life. There is Torah which connects us to Hashem. Right? It's the tool through which a Yid could connect to Hashem. Then there is Torah as it is, as Hashem has inserted himself in the Torah. Then there is a level, but when you say Hashem has inserted himself in Torah, no nafshi k'sofis yehovis, you're still talking about Torah as it relates to Olam. Istakel be'iraisa ubara alma. Hashem looked in the Torah and created the world. Torah is the life force. On Torah the world stands, right? Al shleisha dvarim ha'olam ala Torah. But there's a level of but then there's a level of Torah which goes beyond that. There's something which is called chamuda gnuza, a hidden treasure that I have in my treasure house, which goes beyond the creation of the world, which goes beyond all of that. When you say "Anon nafshi k'savos yehavis," the word "anoichi," I have written my soul into the Torah. What are we talking about? We're talking about the Torah as we know it. But then there's a level of Torah which is chamuda gnuza, beyond all of that, beyond anoichi. Before Bereishis bara l'kibas hashemayim v'sa'aretz, in the actual way that God is creating the world. Chamuda gnuza. Learning Torah Lishma comes from there. That's what learning Torah Lishma is, learning Torah for the sake of learning Torah, which is beyond everything. That aspect we have only in Torah. We can't find that in mitzvah. In mitzvah, you'll get to the point where you're fulfilling mitzvahs just for fulfilling Hashem's will. But you have Hashem's will. Hashem says, fulfill my mitzvahs. What does it mean, learning Torah Lishma? Beyond toiling in Torah? So the Rebbe explains over here in the next part that there is a difference in the actual way. There's an actual difference between learning Torah Lishma rather than to learn Torah for the purpose of fulfilling the mitzvah of learning Torah, even at the highest level. And by definition, between learning Torah Lishma and all other mitzvahs of how to Even the performance of mitzvahs at the highest level is the Rebbe Masber. As mentioned before, when it comes to learning Torah, there are certain limitations. Even when we spoke at the level of Hagisah B'Yom V'Layla, toiling in Torah day and night, which, as we explained, is the most limitless way of learning Torah. Right? Day and night. Nevertheless, there are still certain provisos. As mentioned before, if a person is busy, if a person is genuinely busy, you could still fulfill the mitzvah of the Hagisa. You could still fulfill the mitzvah of learning Torah at the highest level of toiling Torah day and night. Why? As much of your day and night as possible. As much of your day and night as you have. So even though it denotes an ideal of learning Torah in a limitless way, but in actual fact, at the end of the day, there's still certain limitations, there's certain exclusions, right? When you learn Torah Lishma, and by the way, this exclusion is not only in time, but it's also in place. There are certain places where one is not allowed to learn Torah, right? In certain places where you're not allowed to say Davar Shabbat Kedush, you're not allowed to utter anything holy, right? In fact, you're not allowed to even think Torah in those places, right? The Gemara says in Kedushin that we find situations that there are people that even in those places were also thinking Torah. Why is that? So the Gemara says, La'on say shiny. If one is doing it because they can't help themselves, that's different. Meaning to say, when somebody is so immersed in Torah that he's so committed to it that even in those places it's not despite all efforts to distract oneself from Torah, it comes up into one's mind, you can't fault him for that. So we see that there's a way of being connected to Torah in such a way that it breaks through time constraints and also space constraints.
Where's the talk about in Gemara? Where's the talk about?
Sorry?
Where's the talk about that? People.
A merchatz or a bathroom, you know?
No, with people. You're saying people, there are stories of people who...
The Gemara over there talks at length that you have to stand up for a Talmud Chacham when he walks by. So it talks, the whole story, they were sitting in the merchatz. What happens if they're sitting in the merchatz, in the bathhouse, and the Talmud Chacham, it happened that his teacher walked by and he was sitting in the merchatz and he didn't get up for him. So he complained, so somebody said, maybe he's thinking Torah at the time. So there's the outer house, there's the inner house. There's all discussion going backwards and forwards. So the Gemara says, are you allowed to think of Torah in the inner house? You're not allowed to. Mm-hmm. So the Gemara says, La'on say shiny. If it's as a result of being helpless, it's just pushing its way into one's mind, you can't fault him for that. But nevertheless, because he was so preoccupied in that, he didn't stand up for his teacher, whatever it is. But the bottom line is, there are circumstances where we see that it breaks through all barriers. It breaks through all constraints. Right? So that goes beyond V'Hagisa B'Yom V'Layla. So this is what the Rebbe says. So there's a difference not only in the intention of the learning of the Torah. There's a bottom line difference. It expresses itself in a difference. If we can add that the qualitative advantage that one has in learning Torah for the sake of learning Torah, relative to the learning Torah in order to fulfill the mitzvah of learning Torah, even at the level of a hagisa, of toiling, right? It's not only concerning the intent with which one learns. There's also a difference in the actual learning. When one learns Torah for the purpose of what? Fulfilling the commandment of learning Torah. The learning is still limited. Even in the mitzvah of toiling in Torah day and night, which, as we mentioned before, is the highest way of learning Torah, there are still a number of limitations, as is explained in the laws of learning Torah. And as I enumerated some of them before, depending if a person is busy and how busy he is, that will determine his obligation to learn Torah, how much of his day he has to spend on learning Torah, even at the level of Hagisa. Meaning to say, somebody that knows already all the mitzvahs that he needs to do. So for that purpose he's already learned Torah. Someone that either knows the whole Torah already, or will not attain knowledge in the whole Torah, still has an obligation to learn Torah as much as possible. But still there are limitations. There are certain exclusions. When one learns Torah for the not so when one learns Torah for the sake of learning Torah itself, a person when he learns Torah for the sake of learning Torah does not consider, does not pay attention. It doesn't matter to him. He doesn't reckon any limitations or any boundaries whatsoever. He doesn't. Part of his consideration is not whether he is obligated to learn Torah right now or not. That doesn't come into the calculation. His learning is beyond the measure and the limit of time. What does that mean? Of course, there are 24 hours in the day. But it means to say that even if at this particular time he will not be obligated to learn Torah, if he's so committed to learning Torah, it'll push through even that barrier. And he will find how to learn. He'll find the time. It's also beyond the limitation and the boundaries of space. As our sages say in the Talmud and Kiddushin, le'onsei shayni. If it is because he couldn't help himself, it's different. As I just mentioned before, that this is about thinking about Torah concepts in places where one would not be allowed to do so. If one is so consumed by the ideas that one is involved in the learning of the Torah, and it just happens that even there he thinks concepts of Torah, it's different. You can't fault him for that. Why indeed? What is the inner reason? What's behind this idea of learning Torah to such an extent, even beyond the limitations of time and space? Because as mentioned before, even the mitzvah, the commandment of learning Torah, to toil and Torah day and night, this is still an instruction. Hashem says, "V'hagisa, you should toil and Torah day and night." Therefore, there are still some limitations according to the person in time and space. Not so when we talk about learning Torah for the purpose and for the sake of learning Torah itself. Since Torah, as it is on its own, in its source, Torah is really and truly beyond any limitations. Longer than any measure. Therefore, the learning of the Torah, when a person learns Torah, from this perspective, with this in mind, in other words, when his learning is for the sake of learning Torah itself, for the purpose of learning Torah itself, mitzad ha-Torah atzma, from the Torah's perspective itself, meaning to say, not from the perspective of, not as a result of any instruction of learning Torah, even at the highest level of the hagis of toiling. So when one learns Torah lishma for the purpose of learning Torah itself, it's in such a way that he leaves the limitations of time and space. So this idea of going completely beyond one's limitations and defining characteristics, this you find in Torah specifically, and where? At the level of learning Torah Lishma for the sake of learning Torah. And this is a point which goes beyond the highest way of fulfilling any other mitzvah, which is related to the fact that the process of Matan Torah came to completeness at Purim, Mesiras Nefesh, 22,000 children learning Torah, etc., and all of that will become clearer as we go along in the Mamar.